Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another Second Breakfast podcast. I'm Andy Roth alongside Phil Duvall. Today we're going to talk about the movie Wreck-It Ralph. Wreck-It Ralph, the video game
Yes, yes.
awesomeness that is in your cineplexes as we record this. We want to make it clear from the very outset there will be no spoilers in this podcast. Zero spoilers.
Andy, quick question.
Shoot.
Will there be spoilers?
No. No, there will not be
Okay.
spoilers.
So if I, so having not seen Wreck-It Ralph should not stop me from listening to this if I were a listener or viewer.
Indeed, I would encourage it for many reasons, not the least of which it should whet your appetite for seeing the movie. Huh? Seriously.
Ooh. Yes,
Yes.
okay. I
Right.
just want to make sure we're clear.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Right.
Okay. Fantastic.
Spoilers?
So,
No, not
no.
here.
No,
Okay.
what we want to do is talk about aspects of Wreck-It Ralph. And I think we want to start by I just have a question for you, and this may give you a sense of how both of us felt about this movie, which I mean this too. Like I was thinking after I watched it, or while I was really while I was watching it and experiencing it, the
Yes.
first thing that came to my mind was how do you define a perfect movie? Um, what is a perfect movie? Um,
Uh,
there, because I think so. What is perfection when it comes to movies? Because I would absolutely call Wreck-It Ralph a perfect movie.
as would I, and it's interesting that you ask this. Viewers, Phil and I have quite a history, and for a very long time, I have defined a perfect movie in this way. And so, whether he may be doing it consciously, but if he's not, he's doing it unconsciously. He knows my
Unconsciously,
definition.
unconsciously,
Excellent.
and totally sincerely.
I love it when you forget parts of our friendship. Okay.
I just
Here's
assume you forget huge chunks of our friendship, and that's why you like me. That's actually how I think in general. So that's
listen
fine. Continue.
listen, Steve. We're gonna have to hang out with other people now. So here's how I define a perfect movie. A perfect movie is this. It is a movie that the specific story that is told in the movie cannot be told any better. And it doesn't mean, I mean, it's not some sort of objective thing. But for example, The Princess Bride
Mm,
is a perfect movie.
yes.
I defy you to come up with a change that would not only improve that movie but not change it somehow. And I will offer a counterexample, which is a movie that I still love, The Neverending Story. Uh, the book is a better version of that movie than the movie.
I wrote I wouldn't I mean I wouldn't doubt it because I watched the movie. Okay, so when I was in seminary, I wrote a systematic theology paper about the never-ending story
That is the best thing I have ever heard.
and
That is
got
amazing.
an A. And if you look online, just Google this, I found a picture of Jesus riding the dragon with his hand up in the air like like Sebastian.
That
And
is that.
that was the cover of my paper. Um, I won't get into what the paper actually did have theological significance because I argued that the movie is based on the theology of evil of a specific 20th century theologian, which just shows you how stupidly pointless my career has been. But but I wrote that paper. Everyone was like, "You're not," because everyone else was like, "It's seminary. Like you have to take this really seriously, right?" And they were like, "You're not really writing a paper on the never-ending story, are you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I really am." And they're like, "Well, what if I was like, I don't know. I'm just telling you what I'm writing it on. We'll see what happens." And it was
I
like
wasn't
one of the
running
best
this
grades.
by
Like,
you. I was just informing you.
yeah,
Awesome.
dude, and the audacity. It was great. It was great. But anyways, I see exactly what you mean because never-ending story is a deeply flawed and imperfect movie.
Yes.
Is what you're saying? Yeah. Okay.
Um,
I have
yeah.
to. Okay.
So that's
I want to.
just that is my definition, and I know that I sort of used two quote unquote kids movies to as my
It's true.
counterexamples.
Could you give us an adult movie so we'd feel a little bit? Since we're going to talk about Wreck-It Ralph, people are going to think like all we do is talk about kids movies.
That's fair.
Can you give us an example of a perfect adult movie? No, oh, not adult. A perfect grown-up movie. I don't want your opinions on adult
Family
movies.
podcast. Two rules, Phil. No spoilers and family podcast. Um,
Oh, I feel so
I
awkward.
mean, the first two, and there have been many in the last decade, uh, or last 20 years. Okay, so Pulp Fiction, perfect movie.
Yes,
Um, Sound of Music, perfect movie. Casablanca, perfect movie.
fair enough.
Um, um,
Can I say that I think West Side Story is a perfect movie? I mean, I
yes,
can't. I just
you did.
said it. West Side
I
Story is a perfect movie.
yes,
That's a good one.
yes,
I just impressed myself with my choice.
nice.
That's not a good way to treat the world.
French Connection. Um, the
Interesting.
the first
Unforgiven. Unforgiven is a
yes,
perfect movie.
the first Die Hard. I have loved.
Yes. Yes. The first Die Hard is a
Yes,
perfect movie.
yes, yes. Um,
Okay. So here's my I think you and I have very similar answers for the perfect movie, and I think my idea of a perfect movie may be similar to yours. You said though, you said it couldn't the particular thing they were trying to say could not be said any better.
mhm.
And I actually think of it a little differently, but I think I mean I don't know if this is nitpicking. So this is something I would like encourage viewers to think about. Like, what do you think perfect means?
Well,
I think
Phil,
our culture and
Phil, we are. It has to be nitpicking because we're talking about perfection. So you go right
well,
ahead and you.
but that's my point. But that's exactly my point. So I think our culture and our I think culturally we think of and I don't know other cultures. I'm not saying like I hate when people are like, well, America's so crass. You know, in Luxembourg and in did you know that in Sweden they actually say it like this? It's just like just don't. I don't I stop. No, I
Encyclopedia.
just mean like generally in my frame of reference when people are talking about perfection, they mean without a specific flaw. They're talking about this idea that there is an ideal that this thing reaches. And so if something and so there's like a height that it's trying to scale.
Right.
I think of it differently. I think that so for instance, there's a one example would be there's a guy by the name of Bob Dylan.
I
I
haven't
think
heard of this guy.
that he has he'll it's okay, he's a young up and comer. He'll do things on like in some of his earlier albums especially, he would do a song in like and he would like mess up the song, like mess up the lyric and then be like doesn't matter, keep going. And they were like we need to do that again. He's like no, you got what you got. And there's songs on his albums and these are some of his best albums where he laughs for a second in the middle of a line and then keeps going. And
Awesome.
it's a total mess up. It is there's no way you can call that flawless. It is flawed by definition. It is not the way it's supposed to be.
Mm.
And it hits a level of perfection for me. And perfection ends up, it's almost more about its ability to arrest you and hold you in the middle of something than it is about some ideal level. Although maybe I'm talking about an ideal level. This is why I'm saying you and I might not be talking about different things. We're just using different language. But to me, perfection can be flawed. So, for instance, the Wreck-It Ralph perfect movie, I would
Mhm.
change that last song, the song that played during the closing credits. I would change that song in about two shakes of a lamb's tail because it was not a good song.
I
How would you
don't.
make Wreck-It Ralph better? I would change that last song,
Nice.
but it's perfect.
I agree. I confess I'm not remembering the last song at the moment. I saw it a couple days
Wait,
before you did. But I'd also say this. I'd also say this. I don't think we are talking about a different thing. I just think we're talking about different aspects of the same thing. I think.
fair enough.
I mean, again, like there are the Princess Bride or the Goonies. Another.
Searching for Bobby Fischer.
Yes. Yes.
That is a perfect movie.
Yes, but am I certain? Would I testify under oath that every single take that made it into the final cut is the best take that they got of that? No, but who cares? It is because when I say it's the best version of that movie, the best way that story can be told. What I mean is it is the most, to use your word, which is a great word, the most arresting, the most involving, the most engaging version of that story. And a if that involves a flub or two, then
Yes.
that becomes part of what you love. Then that
Yes.
becomes part of what you love.
I'm going to
Um,
say something.
yeah,
I'm going to say something right now. I don't think it's a spoiler. If you feel like it's a spoiler, we will edit it out and just start a new conversation
awesome.
after the fact. But I think it's our conversation about what makes perfection to me is one of the essential aspects of the movie Wreck-It Ralph. That Wreck-It Ralph plays off the idea that there is it plays off of the notion that there is an ideal level to which one must attain, and there is an ideal thing to what one must be, and it is dealing with the idea that the most perfect thing you might end up being is yourself. That instead of thinking about reaching perfection as becoming something better than who you are, reaching perfection is actually becoming who you are. I don't think that's a spoiler. It might be, but on a philosophical level, I think that is the most, like, at its deepest essence, what the movie is about. And so, to some degree, for me, one of the things that makes Wreck-It Ralph a perfect movie is, in many ways, to me, it is a movie about perfection.
Mm-hmm.
Does that? What do you think?
Ooh,
Are we letting?
interesting. Uh, First off, I don't think that's a spoiler.
Okay, good.
We have just ruined the movie for everyone.
I'll never see that movie now.
Uh,
But I think it's a movie about perfection.
uh, that's really interesting. I think, which is not to say that everything you just said isn't interesting, but I think the most interesting thing you said was that last thing, that it is literally a movie about perfection, and I think if I can turn on my high school nerd brain for a second and go back to my Latin, the initial meaning, or sort of the root of the word perfect, doesn't mean the best. It means complete. It means finished.
Yes.
And and both in the modern sense of it, meaning the ideal, the zenith, but certainly in the sense of it meaning completeness or wholeness. I
Sure.
absolutely agree with you. And
Interesting.
as a matter of fact, there are moments, and I won't. This isn't really a spoiler either, but there are moments where they actually deal with that specific thing, like becoming whole.
Yes.
Um, and and so I think that's very well said. I think that's right. It is not only a perfect movie, it is a perfect movie about perfection.
Yes, which I hadn't thought about it until we were talking about it just now, that is what kills me, that is what gets me about it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I found really interesting about this movie, and I don't know how much we'll talk about this, but it starts, and you've seen these scenes in the trailers, anyone who's seen the trailers, that one of the great conceits of the movie, Wreck-It Ralph is a bad guy in an arcade game. There's a video game called, it's not called Wreck-It Ralph,
Nope.
it's called Fix-It Felix Jr. It's based on Donkey Kong Jr. And instead of Donkey Kong, or instead of Mario, you have Fix It Felix. And instead of Donkey Kong dropping these barrels, you have Fix Wreck-It Ralph breaking this building down, and then Fix It Felix has this magic hammer and fixes it. All this is in the first 20 seconds, 30 seconds of the movie.
I'm gonna wreck
So
it.
after the arcade closes down, all of the cartoons are still, or all of the video game characters are still alive, and they go off and they like go to the bars together and they do all this stuff. But Wreck-It Ralph is the bad guy in his game. For whatever reason, he still gets treated like the bad guy when the game is over. So when the lights go out in the arcade and everybody goes home, Wreck-It Ralph is still sleeping on a pile of bricks out in the outside on the sticks, and everyone in the house that he breaks every day and the people are saved, they all still think of him as the bad guy. And so the first thing we see is we see him going to a support group called Badanon, at one game at a time. And it's phenomenal. Again, it's one of the things they've shown in the trailers, which I actually don't mind, because the trailers really don't give almost anything away. They've done a really good job. They really show the first 5 minutes of the movie and give you a sense of what might be it about.
Yeah, it's marvelous in that aspect. I hate it when trailers like, oh well, I've just seen the last scene in the movie, and that is
But
not the case here. It's great.
but they had this thing that it really interested me at the end of the meeting. At the end of a 12-step meeting, generally at the beginning and the end, they'll say a prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Mm-hmm.
Acknowledging for people who are addicts that there'll always be addicts on some level, and that's just the way that it is. At the end of the Badanon meeting, they all hold hands and they say, "We are bad. We will always be bad. We will never be good." And or we are bad guys, not that we are bad guys. We will always be bad guys. We will never be good, or something
Yeah,
along those lines.
I'm a
And
bad
then
guy,
he
but
just
that's not
rejects that
bad. Right.
notion. And there was something about it when I was watching it, and I'm not actually going to come. At first, I thought I had a conclusion, but the way the movie ends makes me think differently about it. And so that would be a total spoiler. I'm not going to talk about it. But I want people to see it. Like, I'm always interested in the way 12-step meetings are shown in media, because
Yeah,
generally it's done terribly. But what's interesting is the
agreed.
idea that they equated this sort of like, there's this sort of like thing that they like, labeling yourself a bad guy, and like, oh well, I'm a bad person, I'm a bad guy, I'm a bad, like, I'm a bad guy, and that's just the way that it is. And he
Right.
says it later on in the movie in a way that's sort of like, I guess that's all I am. And so at first I thought there was almost pushing back against because there's like a backlash against 12-step movements that say the idea, yeah, like Penn Jillette, Penn and Teller, they talk about how the AA movement is terrible because it says that that you're acknowledging this thing that you have, that you are powerless over something, and that you will never not be powerless, and that you give it up to God, regardless of what you think that God is. And Penn
Hmm.
and Teller think that there is no God, and that this is all mind games, and that to say that you are to say, and they're not the only people who say this. This is, a lot of people feel this way. To
Sure.
say that you're powerless forever and will always be this thing means that you have basically given up your ability. Like, you are ceding control to something else, and they have a big major problem with that. And so I was curious watching this movie if it was a pushback against that idea that he's been defined as the bad guy,
Right.
and is it pushing back against that idea, or is it playing with it? And I was thinking about that the entire movie. I don't know if that tangent was too tangential, but I thought it goes to the core of the idea of identity and how we understand ourselves. And do we understand ourselves as flawed? Do we understand ourselves as what do we understand ourselves as?
That's 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 really interesting. I think, and I have some experience with 12-step programs, both in the media and in
What's in the
my
boot, Andy? What's in the boot?
crystal meth.
I
Mm.
was gonna make a bootleg liquor joke with my mason jar, but you just crushed it. You took it.
Well,
I was gonna make like an Everclear joke, but you just went to a beautiful place.
you know what? When in doubt, go right to meth. Go right to meth.
It's the age of Breaking Bad, baby. Okay, continue.
It's true. That's true. Where do we go from here? So I think everything you just said is fascinating and will keep me thinking long past this podcast. But I think that in a perfect world
Yeah.
of 12-step programs, you because you're absolutely right. They talk about um, they talk about um, acceptance,
Yes.
and they talk about God, but it isn't. But if you're someone who is agnostic or atheist, that God you can define it literally however you want. You can define it as your support group of family and friends.
Sure.
You can
They say if God is a doorknob, call it a doorknob. If that, whatever it takes, just
yes, yes, that just
accept it.
acknowledging
Yeah.
that you have shown that you can't do it alone, and
Right.
you can't and there may come a time in the future where no matter how settled you are, you might not be able to do it alone again, basically.
Right.
And and so because it can be defined as anything, I think for the purposes of this discussion and for the purposes of how they use it in the movie, we can sort of set it aside and just focus on the as long as you have that reason, as Billy Crystal and City Slicker said, that one thing, that
The
ooh,
one thing. What's that one thing?
what's
Well,
that one
you have
thing?
to find it.
Uh, as long as you find your one thing,
Mm,
then in those moments where you don't have the strength, you will find the strength in that one thing, and
right.
through that process, you accept whatever is going on, and for many addicts, good things that are going on are just as dangerous as bad things,
Yeah.
because for many reasons, and we don't need to talk about addiction for an hour here. That's not what we're doing. But what I think was interesting was that it plays that out, and I don't want to get into spoilers, but the idea that there is a level of acceptance that certain characters in the movie reach,
Yes.
but that doesn't stop them. That doesn't stop the movie from showing towards the end of the movie, another Badanon right?
Yeah, no, yeah, and I'm interested in that. I think that that was an interesting part of the proceedings for me. That when they come back to that
Mm-hmm.
scene for different reasons, it makes me really interested in thinking of the entire movie with Wreck-It Ralph as an addict.
Yeah,
Like I want to go back now and watch it with Wreck-It Ralph as an addict and what it would say. I think that's a really interesting idea.
totally.
What Wreck-It Ralph actually is a retelling of the Jacob story in Genesis. And this is fascinating to me.
Okay.
Okay?
With the with
Jacob
the with the
is
with the mush and the eating the brother
Jacob and
and the
Esau. Jacob
yeah.
and Esau are twins. They were born to a woman whose name was Rebecca, and they are fighting in the womb. They're fighting in the womb so much that it hurts her stomach, and she prays that maybe she could just be relieved from this pain, and maybe she thinks she's going to die. And God comes to her in a dream and says, two nations are fighting in your womb, and the youngest will supplant the oldest. And Jacob is born, and Yaakov in Hebrew, his name means one who supplants or one who takes by the heel. And he's grabbing Esau's foot as he comes out of the womb.
Get
Okay?
back here! I am not finished
Fantastic
with
imagery.
you.
I mean, fantastic imagery. And so his name, Wreck-It Ralph's name is Wreck-It Ralph. He is defined by his name, much like the characters in the Hebrew
Yeah.
Bible are always defined by their names.
Yeah.
And he's defined by his name as one who wrecks things. That's what he does. He can't help it. When he's trying to be a good guy, he breaks things. He's a wrecking machine, literally, and it's in his name. And the whole movie is him fighting against his identity as this. Jacob is one who supplants, who takes someone else's position, who usurps, and it is actually what he does. His brother is the oldest, and so his brother is entitled to the inheritance. And in that culture, it would have been like a mass majority of the inheritance, even though they're twins. The one who came out first gets the birthright, which literally means like he would get like 75% of the, like if you had a family business, he would get like 75% of it, and he would be the CEO, and his brother who was born holding on to his heel literally seconds later would be like, yeah, you can take care of the buildings and grounds or whatever. It's like, okay.
Right.
And so they set it up like this, and he cons his brother Esau, who is the favored son, the great one, Fix-It Felix, the can do no wrong in his father's eyes
It's true.
guy.
Yeah.
He cons it, and they don't technically hate each other, but there's this weirdness to their situation that they've been put in. Jacob cons his brother out of the birthright, so now he has all his inheritance. Then he tricks his father into getting his father's the blessing, which is this huge deal in Genesis. The blessing is like you are the carrier of God's promise, like literally the physical carrier.
Right.
And it's supposed to go to Esau, and Jacob tricks his dad into giving it to him, which is there's this whole thing where Wreck-It Ralph wants to get a medal so that he can get, if I get a medal, like Fix-It Felix gets, everyone will like me and approve of me. So I will do whatever I have to do to get a medal. And it's not about...
Just very briefly, because I'm loving this.
Okay, go ahead.
The
medal...
medal...
Please interrupt me as much as you need to.
the medal is and it's not presented this way at all, and maybe this is my own attribution, what I am bringing to the movie. The medal is, I mean, it's set up as something that is totally meaningless. It's like, fine, you want me to get a medal? Fine, I'll get a medal. And you as the audience member, you're like, this is ridiculous. He is clearly a nice person. Just treat him like a nice person.
Right.
Make him get a medal. But if you extrapolate that to our multiplayer game culture, that gaming culture is now, it's like, really? Really, you're going for the most kills, really? And it's like, oh, congratulations, you got another like medal in like the Xbox, store or whatever. And of course, I don't know the lingo, and everyone will laugh at me because I don't know the lingo.
Yeah, I don't either, because I haven't played video games since I played Madden with you in college.
Indeed. So I just think that's a brilliant and the process, the initial process of Ralph getting the medal is just absolutely absurd. And it's just like, wow, this was totally meaningless. This could not be more meaningless on any level. And so that, I wonder if there is a... Say again?
No, go ahead. Finish.
I wonder if I wonder if there are any gamers who are like, wow, that was kind of silly. And I'm not saying it's silly. I might feel it's a little silly, but like it makes them happy and that's fine. So,
Sure.
but I wonder if any hardcore gamers saw that and made the connection in their head.
But what is the medal? The medal represents to him a lifetime of his not his brother, but his brother in the game, kind of like his
Yes,
comrade, his and slash nemesis. Which is, I mean, is there anything more true about brothers than that they are your best friend and your enemy at the same time?
indeed.
Is that Fix-It Felix gets medals every single time he wins,
Every single time.
and so this is he gets this, he needs the medal, and the medal is Jacob grows up his whole life, and it says Rebecca loved Jacob, but Isaac, his father, loved Esau,
Right.
which like is so crushing when you read. It's one little sentence in the book of Genesis, but it's so crushing when you think about it. You're like, oh, parents literally would just like, well, I like this one. And so he grows up his entire life trying to impress his father. He just wants to impress Isaac. And so I'll just trick him into liking me. I'll get the blessing and I'll be the one who has the blessing.
Right.
And then he'll have to love me.
Right.
And it's the same thing. I'll get the medal and then they'll care about me. But here's what happens in the rest of Wreck-It Ralph. I don't think this is a spoiler. Wreck-It Ralph then has to spend the rest of the movie, in my opinion, earning the medal that he has stolen. In Genesis, he gets this blessing from Isaac, and it's just words, except it's not just words. He gives him the words of the blessing that God has given Isaac. And when Esau shows back up and realizes what's happened, he goes, well, no, give me the blessing. Give it to me instead. And Isaac says, I already gave it to your brother. I'll give you a different blessing, but I can't give you that one. There's only one.
Right.
And so it's like this thing that it's just words, but I've given it to you. And here's what happens. This is the crazy thing in Genesis. God doesn't say, sorry, you got this the wrong way. You don't get the blessing.
Right.
Jacob very clearly becomes the giver of the blessing, or the carrier of the blessing, but that boy has to earn it. And I spoiler alert for the Bible, I guess that doesn't really count anymore. But the next few chapters of Genesis are Jacob just going through all sorts of craziness. And he has to, and finally he ends up having to wrestle with God himself.
Oh God, that's right where I was. No,
go ahead. Oh, okay. So, spoiler alert.
Now I don't have to read the rest of the Bible.
Are you ready for this? And Andy, you know the answer to this. What happens? Do you remember what happens when he wrestles with God himself?
I do, but not.
What does God do? What does God do to Jacob?
I don't remember it. I don't remember it. What happens?
He changes his name.
Right. Right.
No longer the one who sent it. It came to Israel, one who wrestles with God.
So is there so there's that sense of I receive the blessing. I steal, and again, to steer away from spoilers, steal is a loaded word, and while I don't really object to Phil using it, it's more complicated than that.
Sure.
Receives the blessing when he shouldn't, steals the medal when he shouldn't.
Sure.
That what you go through next is such a fundamental process and a fundamental changing process that you literally cannot be the same afterwards. However
Yes.
you end up,
Yes. Yes.
you are so different that it isn't just what you get. It isn't just how and I'm using that in the biblical sense. It isn't
Yes.
just how other people perceive you in the movie. It is literally who you are and what you are to your core. Is that a fair?
That's it. You've got it exactly.
Yeah.
You got it exactly. In Scripture is filled with names that have meaning and people changing their names because they've become different people. That a name change is an outward sign of an inward change. And it happens repeatedly.
Sure,
And it's and traditionally, I mean, it's why you've heard of the term christened. When a child gets christened,
Yes.
they're literally traditionally that's when they would get their name, because in baptism, traditionally original Christians, a lot of times when they would get baptized, they would literally get new names because it would signify they're completely different people. I'm assuming that in the bris ceremony, the Jewish bris ceremony is the circumcision is when you get your name, right?
Yep.
Officially.
Yep.
So think about that in terms of Jacob. Jacob was given the name Jacob by his mom, but then God gave him the name Israel. So it's an interesting idea when you think about Wreck-It Ralph. We don't want to get into whether or not Wreck-It Ralph changes his name or what happens to Wreck-It Ralph.
Right.
It is not a perfect example of, I mean, when you watch Wreck-It Ralph, you're not watching it, most people aren't watching it going, oh, clearly this is just some Jacob and Esau tale.
Right. This is not the Chronicles of Narnia.
But it is fascinating to me because cartoons often are modern, and comic book movies as well, by the way, are our contemporary myths.
Yes.
And myths build off of each other and build off the myths of the past. And this is, in my mind, so clearly building off of the myth of Jacob and Esau in a wonderful way. It's not a straight retelling by any means.
Right.
And the end is a different end, which is fine, but it uses this sort of mythology. And it made me think the whole time I was watching it, I was thinking of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World.
You mentioned you want to draw a parallel to it, and I
maybe you can see it now.
Well, I can see my parallel to it.
Please, I've talked for so much. Please tell me your parallel.
I think, and I am working this out in my head as I'm saying it. So apologies to Phil and the internet if this comes out stupid, but that's kind of par for the course. I think that it might be. If I can say this, I think it might be two different aspects of the same thing. Because with the Wreck-It Ralph, if you looked at from the mythological standpoint, Wreck-It Ralph is telling a story that, the point of mythology is telling a story you learn from. It's at its most basic, like telling a story that explains something, right? And Wreck-It Ralph is doing that. Where Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, it's not that it isn't doing that, it's that you are watching the people learn the story rather than learning the story yourself. Does that make sense? Like
almost. I'm almost with you. Almost with you.
Like Wreck-It Ralph has to learn something. And the process of the movie is him learning that thing to a greater or lesser or more or less successful degree.
Okay.
Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is okay. And I'm not saying this to say that Scott Pilgrim is a better movie or a more advanced movie, but Scott Pilgrim vs. the World these are characters who have incorporated all of these lessons, all of these myths into themselves, into their personas. And so when something happens like you beat someone up and they explode into a shower of coins,
right,
that doesn't faze you because you know it.
Right.
And it is, and I'm not saying that's the only parallel that can be drawn, but as I see it, it's like how to put this? It is the difference between Jacob getting the birthright and then wrestling God and changing his name that is one thing, and then the analog to Scott Pilgrim would be the early Jews, the early Israelites, literally understanding what great granddad went through, as it were.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's really interesting. That's even deeper than I ever had planned to go. That's how great that is. I love that. That's so great. For me, it's really just like, okay, so there's a guy named Joseph Campbell who is an author and mythologist, and he basically collected all the myths and talked about myths and was very famous in 20th century for popularizing myths.
Yes.
And he's a big influence on George Lucas. George Lucas read this and was like, oh, well, I guess I can just mash up all sorts of different religions into one and make a movie.
Read his stuff and then watch the original trilogy again. Yeah. It's your head.
One of his most famous books is called The Hero with a Thousand Faces, and he sort of just pushes all myths together into what he calls a monomyth and then outlines the story of it. Okay? Which is fine. There's some issues with that. I imagine that Nietzsche would have some issues with that, but Nietzsche would have issues with most things. So anyways, and I think I might side with Nietzsche on this one, but that's okay.
Things Nietzsche never said. No, that's cool. Go with it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Just gonna,
Never said
you know,
that.
it's not my normal thing, but whatevs.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I,
Okay,
I
please
can
continue.
I can venture to bet you that Nietzsche never uttered the word whatevs. I feel pretty comfortable about that. So, anyways, the monomyth he creates a specific hero's journey and says all myths are basically he creates a template and says this is all myths follow this template. It looks like this, the hero's journey looks like this. If you look at the chapter, you don't even have to read the book because you know who reads anymore, that'd be crazy. But if you
Right?
just look at the titles of the chapters and read the basic gist of each chapter and then watch Scott Pilgrim, it is a moment for moment filling out of the hero's journey. Scott Pilgrim is the classical mythological hero, and the
Mm-hmm.
movie is modern contemporary mythology. And more important, but actually, you know what? But more important than that, man, to me, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World was the first movie that was made for our generation, like specifically, explicitly for our generation. And I would say that Wreck-It Ralph is maybe the second movie, but I mean it is Wreck-It Ralph is of the same mind of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, not just because they both have arcade games,
Right.
but to me they are made by people. They are fun people. Our generation are making movies now for our generation as adults with our childhood memories. They're not just make this like Beauty and the Beast is something we grew up on, but it was made by adults
Yeah.
who had grown up on different Disney movies and were making movies thinking they knew what we would like.
Yeah.
Now we are seeing our generation make movies. And so you have things happening that quite frankly older reviewers don't get. I'm reading movie reviews from older reviewers and they clearly it's just I don't mean to be rude about it. They just don't
They just
they were
don't.
like, "Oh, Wreck-It
Yeah.
Ralph is perfectly pleasant, but it's not. It's just a pastiche of arcade games." And I'm like, "No, it's basically writing a movie that is embedded in the fabric of our not just our childhood, but our growing up and our understanding because video games are such an essential part of how we grew up."
Yes. Yes. And
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 it's
and I
just
want
something they
to
don't understand.
and I want to push that further because I know that I was dismissive of hardcore gamers earlier, and I don't really mean to be, but I will say this: neither Phil nor I are hardcore gamers now, and I mean, I until
My wife won't let me be one. She's
until
like, "No, just don't.
nope. See what you're doing
We
there?
have
You're gonna
too many
stop
other
doing
things in
that.
our life. Just don't."
But I mean, I had through college and even after, I had sort of the newest generation game system,
Yeah.
right? And I it gradually got I was basically just buying Madden and NCAA football every year,
Wait,
but
but no, but remember, okay, so do you remember that one time just so you know why my wife is not out of bounds here, I don't have a video game console and I haven't had one since I met her. Do you remember that one time I came to New York for Zombie Palooza, what I did?
yes,
You had that game, what was it, with the sword, Heaven's Sword or
Heavenly
something.
Sword, Heavenly Sword, yeah,
I was at Andy's house for 2 days or 3 days and in Queens, and we watched, aside from watching zombie movies, when we weren't watching zombie movies, never had played the game before, played the game till I beat it. Played the game till I beat it in 3 days because I was like, I'll stop later. I can't. I've
right. And
got,
this is not and not to
well,
disparage. Not to disparage Phil's gaming skills, he's not some savant where I played the game till I beat it means 45 minutes.
no, it was like I lost so much. I didn't sleep the entire time I was at your house. And so when my wife says don't do that, she's right. I have no, I'm like, you know what? Fair.
Fair point. Fair
Fair.
point. Um,
So,
but but
so you were saying you used
yeah,
to be a
but
big video
video
game
games,
console guy.
yeah, but even before that, video games. When you say that video games are an essential part of our growing up, I want to push that further, and I want to tie that in to the mythology aspect because the other thing that mythology does is it brings people together as a community. If you know the same stories as someone else, you're in
Yes.
that person's tribe. Period.
Right.
That is it. And even people, of course, this isn't 100% true, but I would wager that the vast, vast, overwhelming majority, even if you didn't have a gaming console growing up, if you're around our age, maybe a couple years older, but certainly younger, You know the experience of going over to a friend's house to play video games, or just
Yes.
to watch them play video games, or sit
Yes.
around and shoot the breeze as like in a group of
Yes.
8 where 6 of you are talking and not even paying attention to the
Yes.
TV and 2 people are playing.
Yes.
You know the excitement when someone you know has Mario Kart and they get 2 extra controllers so
Right.
that you can play. And it is not, and I don't want to push it. It's not, the god of the younger generation. I'm not saying that, but there is something communal about the aspect. This is what people did.
Yeah.
These are our stories. These
Yeah.
are our stories. There is no one in our generation who has not played at least one game of Super Mario Brothers. There just isn't one of the games.
There's not, and really, there's not a person this generation who hasn't frankly, skipped a college class to play a video game, who
Right?
hasn't played Mario Kart. And that's the funny thing is, I looked over Ebert's review last night, and I thought it was, I mean, he was like, oh, it's nice, but he didn't understand. Like, he's like, oh, it's one more race sequence. And it was like, no, you don't understand. Race sequences, like, basically they created a Mario Kart type game and race sequence you don't understand how important that is for for our generation.
Right.
And it's so funny because it's like, you don't understand, man, you don't understand me. I don't feel that way about it. I just literally, it's very objectively, you don't get it. Because the first time, I mean, I remember skipping theater class, and I was not a kind of kid who would never skip class, okay? And I skipped theater to play Mario Kart with my friend Sebastian, and it actually it was one of the ways Sebastian and I became good friends, was through playing video games. He was an introvert, and he and I didn't have a lot in common. But listening to Willie Nelson and Bob Dylan and playing Mario Kart made us dear friends, and we are friends to this day. And
Yes.
he will never watch this podcast. He doesn't like me that much, but we would it was like, and I remember skipping Tony Cornish's Tony's acting class and being like, I mean, acting was my passion, and I was like, that's okay because Mario Kart is happening right now. It built friendships. It was, I mean, our generation's fabric. It is a huge part of our, and you think about a movie, The Sandlot. Okay, The Sandlot is a movie you and I both love. The Sandlot is a fantastic movie that
Yes.
another movie that our generation loves.
Yes.
Except it's not a movie that any of us could possibly have experienced. It's about a completely different upbringing.
Yes.
I never ever rode my bike down to the corner and played baseball
Down to
with
the
my
Sandlot
pals.
and played. Right. No, absolutely not. You're
But I went
absolutely
over to
right.
their house and played video games.
The difference between us and for example Ebert, and it's not a good or bad difference, it's just a difference, is that if I can use the language of video games, that the race sequence of Mario Kart, it is in some sense in our code. It's just in our
Nice.
code,
Fantastic.
and so there is
Yeah.
there's a shorthand, and I don't think I'm projecting onto the movie more than what is there. I just think that so when I say that there's more going on than someone like Roger Ebert can see,
Yes.
that's not a flaw in him. It's just he doesn't have the same code. He doesn't.
Here's an example I think of that, right?
Yeah.
So the characters in Fix It Felix Jr., because they're older characters, when they move in this little weird jumpy way.
Right.
Which, if you were watching and you weren't a kid who grew up in our generation, you might just think it's funny or amusing. For me, every time it happened, it struck this weird sentimental chord in me.
Yes.
That it's like people who grew up in World War II cannot watch Casablanca and the Marseillaise scene where they're singing. I mean, you and I love it. You and I think it's great, and we think it's amazing. Because we were raised, and quite frankly, politics aside, we were raised in the 1980s when it was rah America, and so to us, it's like this freedom thing. It's perfect. But for people who see that movie who grew up, or someone who I remember, like people who walked out of I saw Saving Private Ryan, and I was like, okay, that was a well done movie,
Right.
With things that I have real issues with. That's a different subject. And but people who walked out of there that were in World War II were like, you don't even know. Don't even like. And so I think that's not to compare our experiences with World War II experiences. It's not even remotely.
No, it's just talking. It's what is in our code. What's in our code.
There's no way it could mean to my parents. My mom would see Wreck-It Ralph and she would think it was fun. Actually, my mom played a lot of video games, but it would not mean to her what it meant to us.
No.
Couldn't.
No.
Fascinating. Wreck-It Ralph is a perfect movie, guys.
Oh,
It really, it is. It is. I will see it again. And not. I mean, my. I have a brother who goes. Of course, you see it again. You see everything again. But there's a lot of movies. There's a lot of movies I only see once. I just remember them really well. But
yeah.
I mean, I think this is a movie that I would actually like. The most fun thing about being a teacher was I would show movies not for the sake of getting out of teaching, but actually because I really think I would get students to learn something and they didn't realize they were learning.
Yes.
Good storytelling is not informative. Good storytelling is transformative. It changes the way you think. It changes the way you perceive, and it takes things that are familiar to you and pulls you in because you're familiar, and then takes you to a place you never could have imagined. I submit that Wreck-It Ralph does this, and there may be other movies. There are other movies that may be better than it this year, and there may be movies that come out after this that I'm so excited for Django Unchained. I'm so excited for The Hobbit. There's other things that I'm not even thinking about that I'm sure I'm excited about. It doesn't take away from the perfection of this movie.
Right.
When I say this movie is perfect, it's not it is in no way about other movies. It is
right.
This movie is perfect.
Right. It doesn't mean it is the best movie because that involves other movies. I think when both of us say perfect,
it is,
movie,
as you said, complete. It is complete.
Yes.
And I think if you're interested in delving into, I mean, if you think the whole conversation we had today about 12 steps, about mythology, about biblical characters, about all that, even if you think it's boring, the fact that the movie could do that, it might speak to how nerdy Andy and I are, but I think it also speaks to how deep this movie really is.
Yes.
There are children's movies that are made to make a buck. And this is not one of them.
Exactly. This
is the best non-Pixar Disney movie, the best non-Disney Pixar movie, easily since Beauty and the Beast. Since Beauty and the Beast, which came out in 89 or 90, so that's now 22 years ago. It's easily the best Disney movie in over 20 years.
Yes, and I would say the thing that maybe we haven't done such a good job of saying or expressing in this podcast, all of these things that we've said are true, but it is a complete blast to watch.
Oh, the whole time.
There is not a single moment where you won't have a stupid grin on your face because what you are seeing, it is visual candy. And I don't just mean it's pretty, although it is very, very pretty.
Yes.
It is visual candy. It is brain candy that will not give you a brain toothache. It is the best.
Will not make you feel the way that the Milk Duds made me feel yesterday.
Indeed.
It is nourishment. It is nourishment, but it's so enjoying. It is, yeah. If you think everything we said was just okay, whatever, that's all fancy talk. Whatever. It's just the most entertaining, enjoyable, funny. John C. Reilly is pitch perfect. Sarah Silverman is
so good.
Manages to use this annoying voice and never be annoying. Like the donkey in Shrek. I get that everybody loves Eddie Murphy. I was so annoyed. Like I was like, yeah, Shrek, kick that donkey. Like kick him harder. Maybe he'll stop talking. But in this, she plays the annoying girl but is so legitimately endearing. I think I cried 3 times during this movie.
I
it might have been 4. I got
no.
teary-eyed during. I mean, it is a legitimate flick, guys. It's legit.
Yes, and
this movie's legit.
You've got Jane Lynch, you've got Jack McBrayer, you've got Alan Tudyk, my guy.
Your guy.
Who you will not
who's
recognize because he's doing something very weird with his voice. But you will say like who is Alan
he's
Tudyk
playing
in
off
that
of
movie?
Who's the guy that makes that voice in old movies? It's a character who talks like this. It's like there's an actual character actor who used to do that voice.
There's Charles Nelson Riley.
It's very Charles Nelson. It could just be that. Maybe that's the one I'm thinking.
Yeah.
I'm gonna think
now that I've said it, I don't think it is, but I don't remember.
Everybody's fantastic. Every scene is fantastic. It's such a blast. It's totally, you could take your kids. Everyone should see it. I went without children because my daughter's 2, and it would have been a disaster.
Sure. Anything else to say? Shall we? I mean, we could talk about this movie forever because
I think we've talked about things that we, what I think this is a perfect example for me, Andy, of what we hope to do in general. I mean, it might not be good. It might be really, really boring, but So I can't guarantee that it's entertaining, but from the point of view of that, Andy, you and I aren't actually specifically interested in reviewing movies. We're interested in talking about them.
Yes.
And we have talked about how much we loved it, but I'm not interested in sitting around talking about movies I don't love. I'm interested in sitting around and talking about why we love things that we love,
Yes.
and then digging into the love of it and why it's so special. And Wreck-It Ralph to me is that, so when I say it's perfect, I don't know that we've done a good job today, but I do know that
We had a
it
good
is the
time.
kind of movie I want to spend our time talking
I
about.
agree. I agree.
So,
Before we sign off, um, our I have a message for our youngest fan, a young gentleman who was born on Leap Day this year.
huh.
His name is Roy. He goes by Rojo.
What's up, Rojo?
Rojo. I
Respect.
have I have been asked by he watches our podcast on YouTube. Big ups to Rojo.
Okay.
I have been asked by his mother to make sure that his first word is not brains. Okay? Now, I can do that for you, Rojo, but you and I are going to work together so that your first complete sentence is, they're coming to get you, Barbara. So that's what we're going to work on. Okay? That's what we're going to work on. Uncle Phil is going to help.
So start with Barbara, right?
Right?
Barbara.
Totally, totally.
Barbara. Barbara.
And I'm sorry to append that, Phil, to Wreck-It Ralph, but I
No
had to.
apologies necessary. I'm coming to get you, Barbara.
Guys, this has been another Second Breakfast podcast. We hope you liked it. We had a lot of fun doing it, and we will see you again real soon. Bye bye.
Have a good day. Bye bye.